My name's Johan and it's indeed my privilege to present this program on work-life integration on behalf of Gibbs, the business school where you're doing your executive development program. And thank you for allowing me to share some perspectives and some practical thoughts on this tantalizing topic. And to you as Barlow World executives, I trust that you're having a wonderful time up in Dubai. And indeed, if time and schedule permits, in the broader Emirates. I had the privilege of working in Abu Dhabi for a year, on and off, and I must say that I was just mesmerized by the extent of their technology, their vision, their commitment to growth, the leisure and recreational hub that they've become globally. I happened to work for an organization at the time which was instrumental in building the magnificent Louvre, the Guggenheim Museum, the submarine museum as well, the Ferrari museum and facility, that incredible F1 track and many other things, the Gary Player Golf Club, the reclaiming of the sea, those extraordinary hotels and condominiums. Just wow, what a place. And I trust that other than technology and of course the excursions into industry and leadership, you're also having time just to savor the myriad of opportunities that this incredible place actually provides. But today's chat is about work-life integration. And you'll notice that we're using the word integration and not only balance, because we're in a world of realities where balancing in itself is becoming probably compoundedly more difficult, if not complex. But integrating these worlds that we're in and that we're immersed in to the extent that they seem to attack one another if you're not careful, calls for integration. On that topic, I should perhaps just authenticate myself quickly before we continue. I happen to work in this world since 1988 and have done all my research in it, and you've been given a copy of my CV, and that's not important. But what is significant in there is that since 1988, where I've worked with executives and with their partners, and they've come to our facility on a residential basis even, I've learned much from these people. To date, I've seen just under 28,000 executives in counseling and therapy. And who are these people? They're us. They're talented people, they're relatively affluent, they have skill, they have potential, they have ambition, they have a strong achievement motive. Industry needs us. And we're not being arrogant, we're just blessed with this talent. But these are also the people who are, if not threatened, then certainly quietly challenged by the whole issue of relationship maintenance, living out their real interests, integrating what constitutes joy and happiness, etc. And I know it sounds syrupy, but nevertheless, these are the people who've informed me and continue to teach me. And what I'm trying to do today is to conduit that myriad of information into a short message and a model which hopefully you can work with and take home, and also go and share with those people closest to you. You should have in your course pack a couple of handouts which I've prepared for your benefit and which I will allude to today, like the human life cycle and two others, but those will be more homework than a comprehensive treating of those documents today. Let's just start with the context very quickly. The life expectancy of the South African executive at present is 76. And that's incidentally calculated by actuaries and not by the medical profession, because the actuaries know what our price is, so they know very well how to budget on our life expectancy or our mortality. And we're getting older, and that in itself is pretty scary in terms of, will our reserves and our resources last long enough, or will we outlive our provision? But 76. I've claimed that date, regardless of what the good Lord might decide when I go, but let's take 76, and I'll just use my protocol for a moment. I'm 67 years old right now, which means that if that statistic were appropriate, I have 9 years to live. And if I want to conclude everything that I neglected or haven't done or that I'm interested in, then I've got to get pretty serious about life and living. And that will call for certain compromises, where I will have to do less of some stuff and engage in other material that'll add the value and the fun that will make me a rounded individual. Pardon the term, as I'm busy dying. Well, we are all busy in a sense. But one of the interesting sensations is this, that the next 9 years of my life is going to happen in here. And it's a diminishing carcass, if you wish. It's not going to climb Kilimanjaro anymore. That one I missed on the list. And it might not run the Comrades anymore. I did that many years ago and left my knees at Polly Short's. But the time that's left must provide sufficient capacity for the undone and the capacity that clutter that I process will create to fill a life of meaning, and that the balance and the integration would constitute the agenda for my future. So I've got to get serious about this and not allow myself to be consumed by, for example, the corporate call or any other appeals that might be of secondary nature. The second aspect is this, that if we then look at this continuum, and if you just put this in your mind's eye, that from the age of 0 to 76, life happens. The first 20 years of that continuum is a phase of being prescriptive and instructional. Other people have us, not by our choice, by their choice. And that prescriptive and instructional phase is where those people tell you that's how things happen here. They have you, they develop you, they feed you, they teach you, they neglect you. And at roughly the age of 20, we leave that domain. And then we go into the world of choice and discretion and freedom. And what do we then do? We experiment with that freedom. And a friend of mine recently said that freedom lasts about 2 weeks. And then we engage in what? A prescriptive and an instructional life for roughly 50 years, the world of work. And this world says add value. It's about return on gross assets. It's EBITDA. It's cost reduction. It's austerity. You know the lingo. And then at roughly 65 and older, and incidentally in America much older now, because pension funds are bankrupt, then we retire, where the pension fund rules say you go, or the Provident Fund. Now consider this, just 2 examples. We do a program with the youth where we want to glean from them what their perspective is about the world of work. In other words, the occupational culture that we bring home. What they sense and even detect in our demeanor when we get home at 7 in the evening. And we don't do research with these kids. We play with them, we observe, and then we integrate our observations. That's not important. That's for another day. But the case I'll always cite and will allude to that was stunning for me, if not devastating, is a young boy getting up after a weekend of play, school leavers, roughly 17, 18, and he's been nominated by his peers to thank me for the weekend, which they typically do, and it's short and brief and just thank you and goodbye. Not on this occasion. The young man gets up and he says, "Sir, I've been asked by the group to thank you." And I say, "Well, thank me." And he says, "I've decided not to thank you." So I say, "Well, then we're out of here, let's go." He says, "No, just a moment, sir." Quote verbatim, "Will you please tell our parents that they owe us more than their wealth and their absence?" I didn't budget for that. That's what he heard. That was his take. Now go on the continuum to the age of roughly 66. At any one stage, and I practice as a psychologist, I have upwards of a dozen people in the age group 65 and older contemplating divorce. And who are they? They're us. They're elegant, they're sophisticated, they've cashed in, they've consolidated their lives, they live lock up and go lifestyles. And one case that I will always cite, which is equally daunting and if you wish, educating as with a young boy, is this case. If I mentioned the names of the people, you would know them. These are people who have retired, consolidated, and they're in trouble. So they're with me for therapy. The husband starts to talk. Now bear in mind, Second World War babies, superimpose a culture on them. Where do they come from? Their extraction, etc. He turns to his wife. I turn him there and I say, talk to this woman, that's your wife. And he starts with a purge of guilt and says, sorry, I was away too often. You were a single parent with a husband. I was overseas much. I flew first class because it was great and I'd never done it before. I come from poverty. I loved the elegance and the opulence and the exposure. Sorry about all the secretaries, she called them secretaries, that threatened you. Sorry about our bad sex life. All of those aspects he just purges. 10 minutes into this discussion, the wife turns to me and she says, excuse me, how long does this take? I said, well, it takes as long as it takes. Why do you inquire? And she says, this is Monday and it's 10 o'clock and I play bowls at 11. And he turns to her, he says, I'll buy you lunch. She says, no, you cannot buy me lunch. Because lunch on a Monday for 26 years has been with a book reading guild. He says, I'll join you for afternoon tea. She says, you're very kind, but you can't because that's with a gardening club. And then opens her diary and I can still see if I'm flashing it in front of her. And she says, this is a survival manual. And it worked. And for 26 years, this became my agenda. And I coped. And now that you threatened with nothing, you want to usurp me again. And she says, I'm not prepared to die twice. And then they get divorced. And they're not angry. Terrible, somber model. Sadly, that's the trend. That's the language. Let's just leave that right there. And can I now invite you to join me on the human life cycle, which I think will convey the message or the essence of the work-life integration from origin to where it ends. And can I invite you to join me on this journey? We will also superimpose the model as background to this production, but can I request that you do actually follow as we go? All right, up to the age of 0. We're 9 months old. And as you will notice, the phase that dominates there, or dominated, was symbiosis. We're in here, and what happens there is that we depend on someone else whilst we're being formed and shaped. Somebody else has us. And that DNA and that genetic structure is what we inherit. But let's stop right there. One generation ago, I was approached by modern younger people saying, or requesting guidance on what is this new world of duality actually entail, where both parents work out and it's a dual career system and we have children. And I didn't know much because I come from a different ethic where our mothers were not allowed to work. Afrikaner extraction, conservative, traditional, that's what I knew. But clients and patients asked a different question, and I should know. So I phoned a friend, read a book, traveled to a country, and I asked around and got very little. Until I realized, but there is a source, and that happened to my father-in-law, who was both a medical doctor and a child psychologist, but you know, you don't consult family because they're not terribly clever. And being out of stock, I went to the wise old man, and I'll never forget. He took his pen from his pocket, and he held it up, and he said, you know, my boy, before a child can standardize the sound that goes with that object, pen, when you visually see it, you can formulate it. It's internalized through training. Before a child can do that independently, like mommy or teddy or boti, that child will have heard it 700 times from the same source. And the wise old man said, I think it's sad if the primary source is absent. Up to the age of 3 is the formative phase. That's where we get our normative construct. Values, norms, principles, standards, ideology, religion, faith. We get it at home. It's inculcated. It's not our choice. That's the way it is. We're born into it. And you get it well and rounded and founded from primary people. If you have to outsource it, it typically doesn't happen. Or it doesn't happen in the context that you may have preferred. Up to the age of 6 is the instructional phase. That's where we're told, don't do that. We say, pick up your bread, pick up your duvet, bring your laundry. Don't do that. Close your mouth when you eat, etc. We shape it, and it becomes second nature. That's the way we relate. That is the interface we have with our space. It's well done by those who are closest to us. Up to the age of 9 is the prescriptive phase of our lives. That's where we are taught independence, how to cope in our own space, how to formulate decisions, choices, how to learn to compromise. But it's also the phase where parents get confidence in their children for them as parents. We will now allow little Sarah to go and sleep out for a weekend with her little friend, knowing she'll cope. She won't wet her bed or want to phone mommy at 12 at night, because we've shaped the independence. Maturation and nurturing took place in a disciplined way or not. Obviously, we're talking about work-life interference. Up to the age of 12 is the puberty phase, and this is the phase where the revolution starts in here. And it's very lonely for most children, where we go through this process of developing physically, but also physiologically. I recall where my daughter would have stepped those days from the bathroom and shriek and wrap a towel and dash down the corridor and bang the bedroom door, and her brothers would say, another tantrum, until my wife would say, no, it shows. And then we understand. Life's busy happening here. Incidentally, have you noticed our little girls of 7 and 8 are starting to develop boobs? Whether it's visual stimulation or the food that we're eating is another discussion. But just imagine if you missed your youth, that you were never young for long enough. Nevertheless, the sexual revolution, where the puberty kicks in, and we can shape that and position it and celebrate it at home if we're there. Up to the age of 15 is all about identity. And this is where the focus is on the self, but also the relevant self, the peer group thing, where we have to establish ourselves in social context. That's where parents get to know about introversion and extroversion, where children are self-possessed, where they're aloof or where they're dynamic. And we can trigger those dimensions that our children manifest or not. You will notice that the focus is also extrinsic. Before that, and go back to your own youth, in my case, our labels were that small and in the collar, and we cut them out. T-Sav and Elmar and Johnson, because those were tickets of poverty. Now the labels are that big and outside, and it's Rip Curl and Billabong, or it's Ferrari or Nike or whatever. We're announcing our association, our alliance. You'll notice with the boys, when they walk, they don't walk, they like stalk. And their underrods must show. And we look at that and we say there's conflict of culture here. And if you're not in tune with their particular process of growth and exposure, then we might just miss it. I think of my daughter who at the age of 15 called me in for a meeting and said to me, Dad, you need liberation here. And I said, help me. And she said, yes, the deal. As from today, you need never again like the music I like, but just know the music I like. And proximity and interface will become the educator. That's if territorially you get close enough. Up to the age of 18 is all about choices. That's where we choose, like maths and science, or not. But the world also chooses us in terms of talent and potential. And the corporate world is certainly very keen to employ us. The corporate call is loud when we have these talents, when CVs look good, when results are great. And they'll pay for our studies, and it's not wrong. But I must just share with you what an orthopedic surgeon friend of mine exclaimed in absolute anguish one day, rushed into my rooms and said, I need help right now. It was late 50s. And I obviously inquired, what's this? And he said, I have a serious problem. I discovered a drama, and I thought cancer or extramarital nonsense, not that. And he shares with me, he said, I've just discovered that I became my qualifications. I have never been me. Question, are you busy being you, or in serious language, if not confrontation, are you living or are you being lived? Is there discretion in what you've chosen? Is there freedom in terms of your vocational commitment or not? I hesitate to use the term, but nevertheless, I think it's so appropriate. Are you in corporate conscription? Are you in prison? Or are you in your own self-directed freedom because you're living your choice and not other people's? Up to 21 is the adolescent phase. That's when we're a little big and plenty small and in the way. This is where you cannot believe that your mother married your father. Everybody is just a bunch of retards. The family, the dog, the drapes, the car, the neighbors, everything. They're just, as we put it in the vernacular, a bunch of doffs. Lasts a couple of months, and it's replaced by a sense of family. You'll remember. And then you embrace it, and you cherish it, and it matters. But you've had one chance once to be an optimal parent, and this is where children leave home. And if you have not inculcated what you want them to draw on, the reserves, the octane that'll keep them going upright and sound choices, etc., then perhaps you are just in time to be too late. Up to the age of 24 is all about relationships. What we have in stock. You would say to that person, I'll join you on a Contiki tour, but not with you. I know there's a connect. There is a symbiosis, or there isn't. My wife once made a statement which I thought was either rude or funny until I realized the depth of it. She said to me, you know, you can only marry somebody you've met. Imagine you didn't meet the people you should have. Imagine your life was too singular during the time that you should scan broader. Imagine living in an ideology where you're not allowed to mix with certain people. And you know exactly what that's all about. But the relationships constitute your social construct. And these are the people that add variety to who you are, that you dine out with, that you tour with, that you have fun with. And they're not necessarily the prescribed people, where other people employ colleagues, and they become your social construct. No, they are colleagues. They are not discretionary people in that sense. Up to the age of 30 is the vocational phase. That's when we're serious about our work lives. It's also the time where we finish the first decade of our institutional worlds. And that decade is just so important. And for many of us with talent, excessively important. We want to make a mark, and we typically do. And the system takes cognizance of our substance and our ambition. And it's not about the corporate handcuffs, that's rude. But we pander to that corporate call. And that system will say, we'll finance whatever you need, and we'll accelerate your growth. And you get the inside track, and you're called crown princes and princesses, etc., and the accolades are bestowed upon us, fantastic. But you're not mature enough yet, and we're impressionable, and very often we become addicted to corporate applause. Up to 33 is a deliberate phase, and that is because the average age of the full-time MBA student in South Africa is 33. Where are you when you're in that mode? You're serious about studying. You're quickly topping up your academics. But where are you not when you're so engaged, if not consumed by this quest? You're not at home because you're typically married and you might have a baby or two. Up to the age of 36 is a maturation and an accelerative phase. That's when we're really flying. And the system is in love now with our talent. And if we're not careful, we are given responsibilities and exposure and demands that we really cannot service yet. And it's not that we employ a facade in order to do so, but we acquire the requisite skills very quickly, and then we do cope. But there could be erosion on this system, and sadly neglect where we should feature. I have to share with you that very sadly also, I'm starting to hear the conventional midlife and mid-career utterances, the sounds, from young people in their late 30s, not late 40s. And it's questions or comments like, what's life all about? Do I really want to live this life? Do I really not see my children every day? And yet it's my hankering to do so. I enjoyed the comment of a friend of mine recently where he says, I have all the symbols of poverty in my garage. I have a jet ski and I have quads and I have a caravan and I have all these things and a lovely new GS motorbike, but all the batteries are flat. Perhaps my life too. So I can offer all the symbols. I've got all the ornaments, the trappings of so-called freedom, and yet I'm incarcerated in the world where they pay well, where I progress well, but perhaps also neglect well. Round about 40, which is the end of the first semester of our lives typically, there is an emotional moment, and that's when children start leaving home. Apart from us who might have had children in private schools on a weekly basis where they come home weekends, but now children leave. They fly. They do the gap year overseas, or they go to varsity, whatever the point is. And you've had one chance once to be the optimal parent. And if you've lost it, then you are too late. The foundational, the grounded input will have happened now, or it hasn't. And at this particular point, it's also the phase, and as you'll notice in your list, where the values clarification is revisited. Interesting, when children do go wrong, and sadly modern children do, the first thing parents always say in counseling is, where did we go wrong as parents? That's self-inflicted guilt, as it were, and we needn't go down that line today. In the mid-40s, there's a very strong focus on materialism. People want to get rid of debt. They work extremely hard. They vest interests and equity, etc., in order just to process all of this. But yet, we have this world of duality. We've got 2 or 3 homes and many cars and stuff and clutter, etc., and yet people want to afford it all and work excessively hard to do it. Interesting, when we do the wish list with modern executives, and I'll take you there in a minute, our people have one very strong discovery in this process, and that is actually decluttering, getting rid of stuff in order to focus on the nucleus of being. And the interesting language that people use is to move from the abundance of meaningless to the singularity of meaningful and finding your joy in there. Sounds terribly philosophical. That's what people share. The values clarification is an interesting process. I'll just take a minute. Since 1988, every year we ask the very people we're having this chat with, you, executives, what are the imperatives that consume your mental and physical energy? Interesting, the same 4 factors have appeared every time. We do a factor analysis, the whole process. And the 4 factors that still predominate are the self, partner, family, work. What is the ideal? We ask the same population, as I've mentioned it. I am the most important person in my life, no question. From a deep-rooted philosophical perspective, I have to love others as I love myself, so get caring sorted out here. Then I say to somebody, join me forever, until death us do part, for sickness, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, nogal. That's what we say, serious language. Out of that combination, we have family. Work is an arbitrary activity. You choose where you go and work. What is the actual or the operational ranking of those factors? Work, second, 2 and 3 remain static. Partner, family, self last. And it's that indictment against the modern entity, the modern individual, you and I, that's actually becoming the conscience of people saying, but how do I sanction that? Why did I do that? Many people who recognize it sadly recognize it too late when they want to normalize it or rationalize it based on the protocol I shared with you at 66 and older, where people say, let me quickly repair it. But the damage is 20 years old. At 50, it's about our posture. I just use the term collectively. That's when we look the part. We've been at work for 30 years, 3 decades. We know the job. We know the space. We relate well. We have ambassadorial look. We are sent overseas as envoys. Cut the deal, borrow the euros, negotiate the merger and the acquisition. We're good, and we're known for it. That sounds like arrogance. Here's the dilemma. In South Africa, the typical executive at the age of 50 will have worked 10 years overtime for free. Never called for. We volunteer it. We actually offer our own demise to a corporate call which perhaps never existed. And so many people say that if you don't spend it, it's career limiting. But who insisted on it? The point here is just this, that if we take the time that belongs to us to actually get the balanced, integrated lifestyle, and we hand that out to someone else, it's lost forever. You don't recoup it. You have to make up in a different way. And sadly still, there's a culture out there which doesn't have a memory. For example, if you do leave the office at lunchtime on a particular afternoon to go and watch your son play soccer or your daughter her first ballet performance, then they would say behind their hands, he's working half day, you know. Yet you've got years in the bank and the company is overdrawn on you. In the mid-50s, it's about alienation, as your list will indicate. And that is when we become alienated from ourselves and we trade in identity. We become this corporate individual, the corporate kid, and we're processed by that corporate momentum in a way where we also become what I call these calendar caricatures. It's just the ritual and the replica and the routine that actually becomes your position charter. This year is just last year plus 10%, and we call it new. Variety and risk and experimentation, etc., very little of that. We've got to make budget, reduce costs. Austerity is the lingo. Nothing wrong with those aspects. But if we're not going to enjoy life from 7 to 7 every day in that sense, then obviously we're in corporate conscription. And if you want to hear it clearly, that's a feudal system. That's slavery. At roughly 60, we do have that moment, that threshold of obsolescence, where we are adjudged to be old and tired, and believe me, many people are. Simple reason, in the era that you and I are alive, we excommunicated the majority of all those people who could have made a contribution from the system. We had apartness. You can't come. You are the preferred people. Then, 20 years ago, we said all people should come and help. We're not all trained. We're busy learning. We're doing an apprenticeship in a new construct. What does that call for? Hard work. And most people are tired at roughly 60, and it will show. But you're not finished when you're 60. Certainly not in terms of cognitive capacity, wisdom, insight, vision. How do we keep fit if we've been exposed to, and probably also to some extent, exploited? Yes, in the mid-60s, things terminate. Elegance, finesse. We attend funerals more often than we do weddings. And it's a moment of somberness that also enters, and there's reflection. There's also the retroactive engagement. You will have seen it in men, where they quickly want to rediscover their youth and play. They get toys. Amongst others, they trade good wives in on a bit of fluff. You've seen that. They drop more buttons than they should. They show more cleavage than women. Funny jewels, etc. You've seen them. Cabriolet cars, etc. It doesn't last. And for those who are most guilty about the neglect, they engage in the most frivolous version thereof. And of course, there is no enduring virtue in that whatsoever. However, we're vulnerable. The reason why we're lonely in the late 60s is not because of the loneliness in our own space. But don't forget that our children now are here. And they're busier than we were. So they don't visit. We don't see grandchildren. Or they're in Perth or Vancouver. And as my wife said recently, you can never kiss on Skype. And you can take that as far as you wish. But if you don't have energy, and if you're not engaged in a journey, a continuing journey of excitement and variety and options, etc., then people sit. And as you know, if you sit, you die. In the mid-70s, people are keen to find out what's life all about. And of course, there's reflection, but there's also projection forward. Things are going to end soon. 76 is looming. And whatever their take is on what happens next, ideologically, people align with that conclusively. And I'm not a pastor nor a theologian, but people talk to us about it. And that alignment has some degree of finality. And the minute people reach that, then they're old, then they're geriatric. Enough of the journey. Now, here's the application. Would you care to step back on your model and go to where your actual age is? Let's say you're 40. Go there. And now ask two questions. The first question is, as you step back from 40 to each one of the other phases, what is your unfinished business that is impeding your mobility? What is the emotional or physical clutter that is in fact inhibiting your momentum forward? Stuff you haven't processed, but stuff that's also pulled your handbrake up. Second question, as you project forward and you do what we call in aviation dead reckoning, that's where I'm going. Have you taken cognizance of crosswinds? Because if there were to be a 10-knot crosswind and it's blowing you off target, then it's wise to know that in advance and aim into wind so that the 10-knot wind will blow you onto your target. But then you've got to budget for a bit more time and fuel. You get the drift. The two questions. What is the unfinished stuff that you perhaps have to disguise through a facade or pretense, or just try and ignore without it truly becoming unpacked, unburdened? And secondly, are you on target? And part of the work-life integration notion and the invitation is perhaps you want to take it home and go and share that with the one that's closest with you and say, are we with our journey on track in terms of destination and destiny where we want to go? Just on a lighter note quickly before I just take you through the other two instruments. I get executives to wish. Now that's childish, but believe me, it becomes very adult. I would say to people, as I'm perhaps challenging you right now, wish, write them down. Not wish list stuff, bucket list stuff only, but wish. What do you wish? And people might say, I wish I could retire now, I've got sufficient cash, or I've got timeshare in the bush. Whatever it is, wish. And they would write down on average 4 wishes. Then I would structure it and say, let's wish adventure, nature, discovery, exploration, culture, skills. Then we have 27 categories. If you'd like to see more of it, I'd be happy to send you a copy. And if so, please indicate to your program organizer. Then I say to people, from each category, choose the wish that matters, the one that you don't want to forfeit, which they then do. That takes half an hour. Then I say, from all of those, let's say 10 categories, 10 wishes, choose the one wish that matters, that will enrich your lifestyle and integrate what you really need. That takes half an hour, and then they choose. And then I say, and this is the deal. How much cash do you have? And I say, don't announce the number, but you've got R1,000,000, you've got 1 million, you've got R1, whatever it is, put it next to that wish. And here's the question, or the challenge. Are you prepared to take 10% of what you have available and factor it into that wish and liberate it? And believe me or not, 40% of people do it. But they had to get the license to liberate savings, to live now, and not to provide for a day which may not even happen. Why do we postpone joy for another day instead of actually embracing a great life now? Why don't we have work-life integration, the source of revenue, credited into a life and a lifestyle now, and liberating yourself into fun? My students did say to me, it's easy to do that if you have no debt, and if you have 10%, that's actually meaningful. Granted. The ethic or the notion, the principle, I think applies. I'd like to invite you to what causes this condition that we've discussed today. And I'm not going to go through this because that's the homework that I would invite you to consider. But I will isolate just 3 to get you going. The first one right at the top is self-explanatory, and there's no pecking order, incidentally, but that is the number one, and that's excessive ambition. And that is trying to become more than you ought to, and to know the difference. I find it fascinating that many people today, and I'll just give you the model, if you wish, the graphic, are saying, but I don't have to be at the top of a structure. I need to be at the top of me. For example, let's say you told you're one of the top 20 in the organization, which many of you probably are. And 19 other people are also told you can make it to the top as you're told as that individual. That means you have a 5% chance, not a 100% chance. And more informed, rational individuals are saying, I'm not pursuing the top of a structure, I'm pursuing the top of me. And whatever that is becomes considered compromise, and whatever they then purchase as free time actually becomes the fuel that liberates more living, more life, and less working. We don't have to work less in the context of lazy. We have to work less in the context of living more. The second one that I just want to isolate is the whole issue in the middle, as you'll see, relational neglect, but also collapse. And sadly, and I have to share this, it's become pandemic. For those people, very often, the world of work becomes the elixir. It's the time out. That's where we can go to. We can escape the trauma and the pain that we experience at home. And of course, it's escapism. But tragically, we can get so much right in the world of work and pander to those relationships and be rated highly on our EQ, etc. But at home, there's very little evidence of it. That's what causes not only the guilt, but the work-life imbalance, distortions that become pathological. The detail, again, is not pertinent for this discussion, but I can say to you that if I were to have 25 hours available every day on that topic, I would not have sufficient hours to treat the demand, the request for help in that spirit. Finally, just on that list, the addiction to one's condition. And that is at the bottom right there, and it's not the last one, believe me. But many people are not aware of how ill they actually are. But they also prefer it. I'll give one example. I saw a man recently who came to me and he said, will you please help me not to be happy again? That's the therapy I want. So I thought, let me quickly certify this guy and then treat him, because this is real absurdity, if not insanity, in the extreme. But this was his point. 42 years old, on the cusp of his fourth marriage. He has 9 children, and the kids have 16 grandparents, etc., etc. And he says, when I get happy, I mess up. I'm never at home. I spend my time in aircraft. I'm very, very wealthy, etc. But I've caused havoc. Help me not to do it. So I go into the whole process and we discuss it, etc. And right at the end of all of it, when he is in absolute pain and regret and remorse, he says, and by the way, I love it. The world I'm in is me. I'm over-revving, but that's the way I've designed. Adrenaline is my breakfast. Who are you? Who are you not? Are you addicted to a world that perhaps doesn't add fundamental value? Or does it? And then, on the final instrument, we track how people are doing, and we do it very carefully. 19% of the people that I work with do something about work-life integration. And even if it's minute, we record it. We're curious about people getting serious about life and living. When we started out in '88, my input was counterproductive. People left me cynically and said, this guy's cuckoos, you can't have that. And then it changed. It was 1%, believe me, 3, 7, etc. We're at 19% now. These are people who do something frivolous like once a week go into the office late and have breakfast with their partner, and they give notice, I'm only in the office at 10. People who legislate that they will never miss a critical activity of a child and not ask for leave, but that's the way it is, etc. Whatever the compromise or the choice is that you exercise, obviously is a matter of your own personal and if not private choice. But the 19% do the things listed here. I must isolate a negative in here just quickly in order to be fair. Of all the people in the 19% that are serious about life, 40% will relapse, and of that 40%, 80% don't return, they get worse. So the addiction that I alluded to, that pull back into that fold is huge. It is omnipotent, it is a profound force, and something not to be underestimated. But on the positive, people who get it right, sadly, most of them see the light through adversity. They lose something, and you will have noticed that when you lose, you learn. You lose a life. There's death in the family. You lose a spouse. Let's mention it, divorce, sadness, regardless of the reasons. You lose health. But adversity brings you to your senses. The most incisive work I do is in an ICU, when people lie there dying and they say, now I see it. I messed up. As one guy said to me, my heart attacked me, but it had to call for that before I realized what life's all about. And sadly, even those people return, having given the reprieve life, and then mess it up again. You will notice in the middle of your list the issue of enough. People who get it right define enough. Enough money. And as much as you may think there's no such thing, define it, ring fence it. If you're in pursuit of money insatiably, you'll never have enough. Say, that's enough. Now live it. You should have enough spouse in your partner. If you don't, you will supplement that individual extramaritally. There are 4,000 escort agencies in Gauteng. If you want some names, I can help you. But the point is, these are supplementary sex shops. Why? It's not good in relationships. It's not enough. If I don't have enough self-image, composure, substance, then my facade becomes who I am. There's not enough of me to cope with the expectation around me. You get the drift. And finally, just on the list, people who get it right educate and discipline their employer. They tell their employers who they are. And they put their hand up and they say, I do that, but this I don't do. The Muslim community on a Friday at 12:30 will go to mosque. If you calculate the number of hours, constitutes a day a month. Put a rand value on that. I've never seen a single employer debit a person so inclined. That's but one example. When have you put your hand up and you say, this is how I engage in the employment contract. This I don't compromise. This I don't trash. This is my treasure. For the rest, you've got everything I have to offer. Selective selfishness is part of the virtue. Selective selfishness. You have to address your own quest, your own needs in the first place. And thereafter the rest, I believe. Why? Because people tell me so. And who are they? Those are the people in adversity. And those are the people who do offer the regrets. Let's finish. And again, my apologies for not being able to be with you. But I trust that this has sufficed for the benefit of purely stimulating a perspective, hopefully some constructive conscience, but most importantly, a roadmap forward where you will find the ingredients that constitute that work-life integration. But this is the story. It touched me deeply when I first heard it. And it's a story about a true life story, a speech, in fact, by Captain Gerald Coffey, who happened to be a pilot in the American Air Force during the Vietnamese War. And he recounts that he was shot down over Hanoi and placed in prison for 7 years. And the isolation in that prison was so absolute that he didn't realize for a year that there were 1,000 of his buddies in that same jail. And through fusion and diffusion, I guess, in that prison, he happened to discover a year later that there are other men in there. It tells that his cell was 6 foot by 6 foot by 8 foot. That's the size of a bed. And everything, ablutions and food, was just in and out like that. No communal contact, no ablutions together, nothing. But being a man of rank, an executive, he decided, I've got to lift the spirits of people. And that will, in fact, lift me up. So he developed what he called tap code. He took the 26 letters of the alphabet and put them in a matrix of 5 by 5. And he then used what he called knuckle language on the wall. And an A was letter 1, row 1. And a B was obviously row 1. It took him a year to teach his neighbor, this isn't sound, this is language coming. And 3 years later, through the diffusion of those walls, he had taught 1,000 people just 3 letters, GBA, God Bless America. And ringing through the walls at the end of every day, unbeknown to the prison wardens what it meant, was God Bless America. And they saluted the flag, and they grabbed their chests where their heart was, and not a single inmate died. After the release and the armistice, Kissinger and Nixon received this incredible man back. They vindicated his story, and then they wanted to tour him to share this with the nation, and he refused. Right up to the point where they realized it's emphatic, he's not going to do it. And they said, why not? And he said, it's terribly simple. It's not that great. It's not that magic. It's not for universal consumption. Why? And he said, it took me 7 years of incarceration to discover who I am. And he said, I discovered what is the difference between that and freedom. And by God, I know it now. I don't believe the world of work has ever been designed to imprison us in a way where we forfeit our fundamental self. If we give it away, it was never called for. If we preserve it, it rounds us even better and makes us more employable. But then the great call is just this. If you and I are the executives of today and of tomorrow, engage in organization renewal, legislate against abuse, notably self. Create a climate, a superstructure in an organization where you disallow the demise of people, starting at the top. And in that way, I believe, and we've proven that scientifically, make the investor and the shareholder very happy. I thank you.